And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw Sunday edition. We haven't done this in a little bit because last week we were at the Vancouver retreat, which was a lot of fun. That worked out really well. I wanted to thank everybody who managed to come to that retreat. It was deep and insightful, and there was a lot of walking involved. And I was really excited that we got to sit by the ocean and go for a swim and sit together and have such open conversations. It really was transformative for me, and I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who could attend. I am likewise very excited for the Vermont retreat, which is coming up in about 2 weeks or so, August 24th to August 28th. It is sold out now. I'm sorry if you'd like to come, but we are actually contemplating another Vancouver mini retreat on October 5th to October 9th. It'll be a 4-day from Thursday night to Monday morning. We have not decided if we're doing this yet. If this is something that interests you, if you would like to go, I encourage you to reach out to us on Patreon or reach out to us through Discord or social media and let us know. Right now, we do have a poll up to ask how much interest there is for that event. So definitely join us on Patreon if you can. There's a free trial, 7 days. You get to try out all of our groups, which we do 5 days a week. So that'll determine whether or not we're doing a Vancouver mini retreat. But regardless, whether we're doing a Vancouver mini retreat, we have the Netherlands retreat that is coming up, and it's coming up fast. November 11th to November 19th. This is a 9-day retreat. This is the third full retreat that we have done since we started doing retreats. The last 2 retreats, anybody who was there will tell you they're incredible. The mini retreats are incredible, and you can find out from anybody who went to those, but to double that amount of time. And to not only double the time, but to change the venue to one where we're not mutually pitching into food together. We're not cooking together necessarily. Somebody is cooking for us. There is a great deal more time that is spent at these 9-day retreats on just you. Just working on you, having time with you, having time with the community. It's going to be just incredible. So if you can make it to that retreat, don't miss it. It's going to be the largest community event so far, 34 guests in all. And I believe we have about 18 tickets left. That said, 4 of those tickets are in the shared rooms on the 3rd floor. Those 2 shared rooms have 6 beds apiece. We will be spending a little bit of private time with each of those rooms. That is the perk of being in the shared room, as well as the shared experience of having a sleepover with some awesome people. There are also a bunch of semi-private rooms, which are really quite nice and have their own private bathroom. So I would recommend checking that out as soon as you can, because those tickets are going to go fast.
Yeah, it's interesting the way the longer retreats kind of break down. Is the first half is really the build, takes a day or two. It's, for the most part, it's all a bunch of people who have interacted in the past, on Patreon calls a lot of times, but it's people getting to know each other. And so even just going to a retreat is a leap, is a leap of faith in yourself, is stepping into uncertainty. You don't know necessarily what we're like in person. You don't know, unless you've been to a retreat in the past. You don't know the people who are going to be there. You don't know how it's really going to play out, because we purposefully don't have much of a schedule or agenda. There's tons and tons to do, but we don't send out a preset like every hour on the hour. We got this, we got this, we got this, we got this, because that's not the mentality that we're looking to embody. It really is freedom. That's the focus there, and freedom just to be yourself, and that separation from living on a schedule is really impactful. It's something that I think we don't even realize how much we do it, how often we check the time throughout the day. Oh, I got something coming up, especially during a work week. It's like every 30 minutes we have booked out. It's like, okay, I got 10 minutes in between this. I got 10 minutes to do this. And then it's always kind of living by that time. And so at the retreats, one of the beauties is that there's no rules saying, no electronics, limited electronics or anything like that. You can spend the whole time on your phone if you really want to. It's just that people don't, because there's a prioritization of the experience, that we're having. And so when you're not checking the time all the time, when you go for 12 hours, even 3 hours, 4 hours straight without looking at the clock, time changes. There's a different sort of experience. And so anyway, the mini retreats are incredible, and they're really that build to a point where you're like, oh, this is okay to live like this. And then once you hit that point, it's kind of like that's as the retreat is ending over the first 3-4 days, and then you go back into your life. But the beauty of the longer ones is that you go through that in the first half, and then the second half is just kind of you get to enjoy that with a bunch of cool people in a really cool place. And so the first half is kind of that build up, and then the second half is just relaxing into really seeing what it's like to live life like that. And then, by the time those last 4 days, 3-4 days end, you're like, all right, I'm ready to go back into my life. This has been amazing, but I'm ready for things to get a little rocky again. I'm ready to test my ability to do certain things. And so the full week is really really life changing. Honestly, it has the potential to be so, because it's such a drastically different experience than the one most people are used to, living by the clock, living by the schedule. And so if you can make it to a mini retreat, they're fucking incredible. But the longer retreats really have the potential for a long lasting life changing impact in my opinion.
Oh, it's not just in your opinion. Like I'll say it with absolutely no shame whatsoever. There have been a number of people who have come to our retreats who, shortly after leaving our retreats, have just decided they're going to do the thing that they've been sitting on for years. And it's just because how often are we just riddled with doubt about something that intuitively we know we should be doing? And we have so much in terms of influence in our life, pushing and pulling, people who are insecure, people who need to have control, people who are afraid of change. And so we end up locked in paralysis out of empathy, oddly enough, but it's short term empathy. And we don't really have the space to see that often. Sometimes we think we're helping when we're really hindering. And so at the retreat, you're able to get that space. You're able to sit with other people who are likewise trying to just get their space and have some room to breathe. And in doing so, having insights about their life, because they're not being pushed and pulled by the circumstances of their life. They are surrounded with people who are going through the same experience of untethering themselves so they can get some clarity and then make a choice after the fact. And so I will straight up fucking say, these retreats have the potential to be life-changing, but it's really on you. It's on you, because that's the only way it sticks. That's the only way it sticks. So it's not about us. All we're doing is providing you with the space that you need to truly get some clarity about what you want to do, so you have more conviction in your choices. That's it. It's not that we're ever letting go. We're not helping you let go of all of the doubt, but we're letting you come to a point where you look at the doubt for what it is, rather than letting it push and pull you all the time and stop you from making the choice that's going to change your life, and in a way that you intuitively know is the way that you want to go. So that said about the retreats, do join us. And again, if you can join us October 5th, we have a nice spot picked out in Vancouver. It's got a hot tub, it's got a pool table, and it just looks dope. So if you'd like to join us, reach out on Patreon, do vote in the poll, and that'd be great. I have one more announcement, because it's important that we do these announcements from time to time. We're in the People's Choice Podcast Awards this year again. I'm very excited about that. If you haven't voted for Dualistic Unity, we are in the religion and spirituality category, the society category, and the People's Choice category. So you can register at podcastawards.com. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes. It's very quick. Just choose Dualistic Unity in the categories that you would like, and that helps us out. We made it to the semifinal slate last year, which was really kind of exciting, considering all of the people in those categories had a production team and a great deal of production value, whereas Andrew and I, all of our value is in the insights and the conversations that change our life and the community that comes along with us and changes their own lives. And so it's going to be a different year this year, because last year I think we had a combined audience of about 2,000 people. This year we're currently up to about 16,750 people.
So yeah, safe to say the chances aren't as stacked against us this year. And it's funny that even in that, like, as much as is going on, like, really the recording and the process that we go through in filming this stuff hasn't really changed much. It's still just us with our microphones and our computer and whatever surface we can come up with. You're typically at your desk, and I'm usually on some makeshift thing. I'm currently on this mini wobbly table, which is where my microphone is, and a mini dresser slash nightstand is up against the wall. That's where my computer's set up, my light, and there's like enough space for my microphone and notebook in front of me. And it's just about making it work. And it ends up looking okay on screen, but then in front of me, it's just like a fucking mess of things. So it's fun though, and that's part of it, right? Because it's not about the setup or necessarily the production quality and all that shit. And so many people can focus on that, not even with a podcast, but just things in general. Like I've come across people who they want to start making content or doing something, even doing anything in their life, even fucking take up running or working out, and they get all the gear, they do all the things, and like half the time it's not really even about what's coming out. It's not about the quality of the thing. Like with the podcast, it's about, how high quality of a camera do we have? How high quality of a microphone? Like what's going on here? What's going on here? How's this topic going to sound for people? How's this guest going to look? Is this going to, help us grow? And it's like, we don't think about any of that shit, really. Like we have had every extreme of type of guest on the spectrum of very popular to someone who is just really insightful and doesn't have much of an audience and just someone cool to talk to. And a lot of people will just focus on, growth strictly. And it's like, oh man, I see some podcasts, like not to I don't want to like talk shit on someone, but like Jay Shetty is just having some guests on who are just absolutely ridiculous, but they're super famous. And again, it's not even that certain people should be on or shouldn't be on or whatever, but it's just it sometimes people focus a little bit too much on that. But again, nothing necessarily wrong with that either. But yeah, I have some thoughts I can get into here at some point. How to, I don't know, some deeper insights the other day. Not even like depth from a being reality standpoint, but it's all been on the side of Andrew and all that. So
we'll get into that for sure. I wanted to mention something in follow up to what you were saying first, and then we'll get into the deeper spectrum. Thank you, everyone who could join us so far. We were talking about this in our latest episode of Being High with Riley Kirk, which was a fucking awesome episode. Anybody who hasn't checked that out, episode 3 of Being High with Dualistic Unity is incredibly informative. Go and check that conversation out. If you have any questions about cannabis, marijuana, the benefits, the dangers, all that shit, go and check out that episode. It's really, really good. But we were talking about why we enjoy smoking a big fat cannon before we start that episode. And it's because the lesson, as with all of the lessons in all of the podcast episodes that we've recorded, we're just being a little bit more in your face about it with the Being High episodes, is that you can just fucking arrive. Like, we never know what we're going to talk about. I said it just as we were getting into this episode today. No idea. Andrew's like, well, I've got a few ideas. I'm like, perfect. But the point is that we don't have to, because we are what we are leading up to that moment. And the only thing we have to do is participate. We don't have to know how to participate. We just have to have the willingness to participate. And suddenly there are words. Suddenly there are things to say. There is interest. There's enthusiasm. There's curiosity. There's all of that. But why? Because I'm choosing to participate rather than sit here and look at it like, oh, I can't do that because this isn't right. And this isn't right. And I don't feel confident yet. And people haven't told me I'm a good speaker. And all of this justification to basically make the decision to just not participate. So the justification is irrelevant. It's the non-participation that's kicking you in the ass, because how can you see what you're capable of if you're not doing any of it? So just show up. Just arrive as you are. And as you are, you will pay more attention because you're not trying to be something else. You will learn more faster because you're not trying to be something else, and you're not worried about making a quote unquote mistake. You are just arriving as you are, which means you're not trying to be perfect. You're not trying to know everything. So you're learning, you're growing, you're experiencing things. things. And that is one of the reasons that I love more than anything reaching out to a member of the community or reaching out to a TikTok creator who has 1,000 followers, who's insightful as shit and loves to talk about this stuff, because they show up and they just start talking. They're not trying to be anything. They're not trying to get more attention. They love it. They genuinely love it. And that's the conversation. And so it's funny because although we're not focused on quote unquote growth in terms of always having major influencers on the show, we are focused on growth in terms of the quality of our content, the quality of our discussions, the quality of the show itself, the quality of the community discussion, because it's all an extension of that. And it really just comes down to showing up and enjoying ourselves and recognizing that anybody else can do that too, which is the message. It's the message for anybody who's listening. You can just arrive. You can do this. You want a podcast? Get a microphone. If you can. You can use your cell phone. Just start talking and keep talking. And eventually people will start listening because they want to do it too. And you're being an example that they can. That's it. Just arrive. You'd be amazed at how fucking powerful that is.
And it's so funny that you bring that up and like that was the discussion or a component of the discussion, because you can like I was obviously there for that discussion. I was involved in that discussion, but then it'll hit in a way that it's like, oh my God, it's that. Oh my God. Like, and so for me, and it was the I think it's the last video I posted, like it hit me in the sense that I was able to recognize that there was nothing wrong with me, but there was like whatever came up, nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with that. But it was always, and I don't know how common this is, but it was like I knew there was nothing wrong with me, and it was like when I recognize that, then I'll be different than I am right now. Like if I recognize there's nothing wrong, then I'll be more relaxed. Then I'll be
Very
more
common.
confident. Okay. Like it blew my mind because that's always been in the back of my head as I'm saying this. It's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. And then I can be this or then I can be that. And so it hit me. It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with you right now. Like, this is it. Like the way that you are right fucking now, the person that you've always been for your entire life, there's never been anything wrong with that. It's not like there was still, oh my God, until fucking what day? I don't know, 2 days ago, there was still very much this idea that there is. And it's like you recognize it so that you can become the better version of yourself. It's like, fuck that. No, there is no better version of yourself. There is no higher self. There is no other version that's like, got all the attributes right now. They're at like 60, 70, and they go up to like 70, 80 when you recognize that there's nothing wrong with this version that's 60, 70 that you're still happen to be measuring and thinking it could be better. Oh, if only I acted this way. If only I did these types of things. If only I had this going on. If only, and then I'd be, and oh my God, I was like, holy fuck. And then I was listening. It was funny too, just the timing and how things kind of work out. So, someone at one of the recent retreats, I don't know, maybe the third retreat, recommended, Rainbow Kitten Surprise, the band. And I'd listened to Cocaine Jesus a number of times, and they recommended like 5 songs. And I listened to Painkillers at one point, and that was also on a run that hit me, like a different insight sort of hit me, or it was something that I did, and I was like, "Ooh, fuck, that wasn't a great." And I had to kind of like backpedal a tiny bit. And so that it was funny that the timing with that song, and then so with this song, it's called Free Fall is the song, and I listened to it, and I finally, like, I would always skip over it because I thought the beginning was super slow. So when I was like working out or running, I would just skip it. And this time I didn't. It was the first time I didn't skip it, and it was like, oh man, the word, like I started crying on my run, when it was like, you can let it go, you can let it all go, and there's another couple parts to it that just hit me as I was realizing, oh my God, I've always thought I've been able to recognize like there's nothing wrong but it was always so that I could, it's like once I recognize that, then I'm a little bit different. And then it's a more relaxed version, or a more confident, or more willing to do certain things, or a funnier version, or better spoken version. And it's like, no, it's just you right now. Like right now, you from 5 years ago, nothing wrong with that. You from 10 years, you from 15 years ago. And so there was still just this subtle thing, like, kind of like there used to be something wrong with me and there's less wrong with me. And then once I start to realize, once I really get that there's nothing wrong with me, then there will be even less wrong with me. And it's still this fucking journey to become something. And like, oh my God, how I was like, how the fuck has this not hit me that it's just me right now? There's nothing wrong. And so it's been like every moment, things come up and it's like, no, it's not about being any different. Like all these fucking subtle things that I'm concerned about, like there's nothing wrong with those. And so you don't have to fight them. You don't have to act any different than you are. You don't have to be any different than you are, like the you right now, today, in this moment, as you're hearing these words, that you, there's nothing wrong with whatsoever. And so you can just, as Ray was just saying, you can just arrive. You can just participate. You can just jump in. You don't need to prep so much. You don't need to do so many things. Make sure this goes this way or this way. It's just, no, participate, because that's the best version of you, is the one who just fucking participates and takes part and jumps in and partakes. But I was like, I was like fucking mind blown that I had never realized that before, that it was like this, exactly as I am right now. There's nothing to change. There's nothing more to become. There's nothing wrong. And I've said it a fucking billion times. And yeah, it didn't hit. And it's funny because, the conversation with Riley, the conversations previously, like they were all kind of building up to that in a sense when I look back, but like none of them hit in the same way as that. Yeah, whatever it was that hit me.
The perception of wrong and right is overly simplistic, as we've described before. There are things that are destructive and creative, and even that, I mean, even that's a short-term view. Like a wildfire is looked at as destructive until a new forest grows, in which case it grew out of the destruction. So was it so destructive? And so there's that. But we really have this habit of mixing the description with the described, right? Like I've done something that had a consequence. I could have done something that didn't have that consequence. Therefore, the thing I did that had a consequence is the wrong thing, right? It was just the thing. It was just the next thing that happened. But we get in there and we perceive it as something that's wrong. And so it's funny that it's almost, how do I put this? It's not that there's something wrong with us. That's just another way of dwelling on the you, that there could be something wrong with. And that's the direction that we're always going in. That's it. The direction that there's a you that needs analysis. There's a you that could be doing the right or wrong thing, that there's a right or wrong thing for that you to do. And as long as you are in that mentality, as long as you're thinking that way to a greater and greater and greater degree, you become more and more and more destructive just by virtue of the fact that you lack attention and awareness. The thing is that no matter how destructive you become, and this is where people go like, well, murderers and pedophiles and all of this stuff. And I get it. I fucking get it. Like, it's really hard to look at somebody who's in that mentality, who's so unaware of everyone around them and the destruction that they're causing because they're so lost in their head, and not look at them as something wrong. But they are destructive. How did they get that destructive? They got that destructive through dwelling upon the fiction of them that could have something wrong with it, and running desperately for some sense of being right, of being valuable, of being powerful and in control, for some cessation of the pain that goes with the over analysis of who they are and what their value is. That's how we get there. People always make the argument, well, there's something wrong with those people. It's like, you are the reason that those people are so fucking badly off. It's that mentality, because they grew up with it, right? And they ran from it until it created a monster that they were trying to avoid becoming at one point. right? And so it really is just the fiction of you. That's the direction that we're taking. How deeply into the fiction of you would you like to go? How much would you like to relax and get out? And at no point does it mean you're doing something wrong or right. It's just a difference in how you live. It's just a difference in how much attention you are actually able to pay to what is happening around you and what you're doing. Because the more you're absorbed in this fiction of you that can be wrong or right, can lose value or gain value, exist by comparison to other fictions, the more you're in that, the more destruction you will cause just because of lack of sensitivity, because you have your head in a bag and you are running around looking for some cessation to your pain, running into everyone. Just because you're unaware of it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's an option at the end of the day, and to something that is eternal, to the universe, reality, being, whatever it might be called. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It simply continues to change form. And so to the universe, there is nothing but constant change. It doesn't look at it as right or wrong, just destructive or creative in the short term. Again, that's not even accurate.
Yeah, like we don't want to let go of that recognition that with the extremes of murder, child abuse, or any sort of extreme end of just destructive behavior, like that's a product of the mentality that's constantly measuring right or wrong. Like there is a fucking mental, emotional weight that comes from measuring yourself constantly. Because even what I've realized in the last month or so and whatever's been going on in my life, like every situation has the potential to be like you could judge yourself in any variation of any experience. Like you can judge yourself for how you fucking walk down the street. Like as you're walking, you can judge that. So it can be the extreme to so like every single move you make, every single sound you make has the potential to be judged. And it's that mentality. If you're doing that to the extreme where it's every single movement, every single, you know, interaction. And even as I'm saying it, like part of me is like, that's crazy to judge yourself that much. But at the same time, it's like super normal.
I would love to tell you that I spent like a decade exactly in that. There was nothing I ever did that was right. Nothing. 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 It didn't matter what it was. If I talked to somebody, I was doing it wrong. If I dressed myself, I was doing it wrong. If I was eating out, I was doing it wrong. There was always some fucking judgment because there was always some need to measure how I was doing. And in that need to measure how I was doing, I was always my own worst critic. Because the more you want to measure, the more you're a critic. Right? How am I doing? And you're looking for all the details. It's like getting that English teacher in high school that starts like taking off half marks for commas that are in there. You're like, really? That was worth a whole half mark, right? Like that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, you're immediately more worried about going into the next test, right? So the harsher a critic you are on yourself, it is directly correlated to how much you want to measure your progress. If you can let that go, you're not going to critique yourself. You're going to be way more reasonable. If you can understand that your judgment is in fact getting in the way of your performance, then you've really got it. Then the game really starts to change for you because you're like, oh shit, I'm making this harder on myself, and that's it. You are by trying to measure how you're doing, and that's why it takes a leap of insight. That's why it really does take a leap of faith. You have to just let go. And you have to keep doing it because a lot of people, what they'll do is be like, okay, well, I'm going to let go. That didn't go the way I wanted it to. That is not letting go.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this a 1 month test of letting go, and then if I don't get everything I've ever wanted in my entire life, then it doesn't actually work. It's like, oh Jesus Christ! But so anyway, as I was saying it, part of me was like, oh, that would be crazy to do. But then I think about myself and people I know, and it's not that crazy. Like it's even the extreme of like literally every muscle movement as you're walking, like judging each individual step and movement. Like that's not that far off than how a lot of people live. Like a lot of people live in that constant state of measurement and judgment because it's it's that desire to know. Like the desire to know spans across so many different things that we do, to know reality, to know what's happening in my life, to know how I'm doing, to know what's to come, and all these things that you can't have. Like you can't know them. You can't know reality conceptually. You can't know what's to come. You can't know how you're doing. You can't know how you compare. Like you really can't. And I say this fully doing that shit, measuring myself all the time. So like, don't think that I'm saying it's an absurd thing to do. Like it is and it isn't. It's absurd, but it's also common. And I do it all the time. But it's like it's so fucking futile. Like it is impossible. It is impossible to do. And so we're constantly butting up against this impossible thing, trying to do it and wondering why we're suffering, wondering why we're missing our lives, wondering why things are going awry because you're not paying attention to those things. And so it's interesting just how many people just that mentality of right and wrong and good and bad, and the finality and the division between like separating moments from each other. Like you can't judge things as easily when you see that they're not disconnected from others, and making the assumption that things are separate, and that you're separate. It really is that as soon as there's a you involved in the situation, there's an ability to measure and judge, and it's like we're always like we're so constantly at another point, and I'm trying to talk until it comes back. But it was something about just how self-involved we are, and like how we're constantly just thinking about ourselves. And it was something along those lines. It wasn't exactly that. So I'm just gonna pass it over.
Of course you are, as I'm coughing and choking on my coffee. That's great.
Here,
I
right.
appreciate it. No, it's we always talk about this, but it's really the depth that you get it that changes everything. It's not about knowing it or memorizing it, or going, yeah, I'm not what I think I am. And then somebody says, you're a dumbass, and you get all pissed off about it. Like it really is like, I'm not what I think I am, which means I'm not that. I'm not any of that. And that's true when somebody's like, "When you're a genius," and you're like, "Yeah, I'm not that either," because that's just a label, right? And so it's it's tricky because we keep trying to make these into separate problems, right? Like, I'm identifying, oh, I'm not being present, oh, I'm judging, oh, I'm trying to measure my value. They're all the same problem. They're all the same problem, which is overcommitment to the perspective of division, of duality. That's what identity is. Identity is how we commit to the perspective of duality. Okay? We really do. The more we commit to it, the more we get lost in it. The more you are committed to the idea that you are an idea, the more that you are committed to you being something that is measurable, that is, in fact, real. The thought of you that is real. The more you commit to that, the more you have to defend it. The more you have to worry about it, the more you have to think about it, the more you have to control everything, the more you have to doubt, the more you have to fear, the more you have to, worry and manipulate and do all of that stuff. There's more stuff you have to do now. There's things you have to fix. There's mistakes that you can make. And it all comes down to this deepening hole of your ego. That's it. How much do you want to participate in the fiction of you? That is the question of this. That is the only fucking question. We were never told that's a question. We were told, no, that's all there is. Get in there. Go get your master's, get a PhD. People will value you. You'll be valuable. Don't worry, that's measurable. Anybody who's working at McDonald's, they're worth less than you, blah, 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 blah. Like, we were all told this shit, and nobody was ever told, like, yeah, you could take that seriously, but it's going to cause a lot of shit for you. Dip your toe into identity. Laugh at yourself. See, that's the nice thing about not taking yourself too seriously, is that you can laugh at yourself. You can laugh at your stupid fucking things that you do because you're not taking yourself seriously, and it doesn't indicate that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't indicate that there's a loss of value. Your life immediately becomes more rich and more full just by not taking yourself so goddamn seriously. Isn't that funny? But that's what it is. That's all this is about. How committed are you to the idea of yourself? And you know that through your triggers.
Yeah, and so this actually ties into what I was thinking about before when it comes to cannabis and weed. Like that, I'm seeing more and more how interesting it is, and I know Ray's had lots more experience with that. But just when people say things like it makes me anxious or paranoid or concerned, it's kind of like how much do you think about yourself? Like how seriously do you take yourself? Like like that, I'm not saying that's but that's kind of a big indication of how well or poorly you handle cannabis. Like if you take yourself really, really seriously and you're very rigid and you're very serious about things, then weed is kind of like shows you that. Like it shows you another component of you that maybe you're suppressing that is a little more relaxed, more chill, more, I don't know, giggly or happy or whatever. And if that's not really a component of or a side of yourself that you hold on to as being I am valuable because I, work hard and do these things, blah, 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 blah. And so you smoke a little bit and there's a going to be almost like a separation between how you naturally would act if you're a little bit high versus the way that you act when you're, tense and trying to act the right way and taking everything very seriously and taking yourself very seriously. And so as you take yourself less seriously, you realize more and more there isn't so much a right or a wrong way to act. There's not so much a right or a wrong way to move or thing to say. Then you're more willing to step into things. You're more willing to like let whatever happens happen. Like I think when if you're high and you're chilling and you're relaxed, like things come out and you're just like, yeah, whatever. It is what it is. Like it's that recognition, like there's nothing wrong with me right now, even when I'm baked as fuck and having all these funny thoughts and just talking out my ass for the sake of talking and having a good time and whatever. It's like because there isn't the hesitation and concern of thinking that, oh, one of these things that I do could be wrong. It's like that's going to create such a resistance to the natural way of acting because you're not willing to just let go. But if you just let go, it'll be way more appreciated. And so it's kind of just shows if someone's very resistant, which is funny because if you know that and people think, you can just write it off and be like, oh yeah, weed makes me anxious. And it's just like even now, and I say this as myself as someone who has said that for their whole life, that no, you're just anxious. You just take things really seriously. You just take yourself really seriously. That's it. It's not the weed. It's not about the weed having a certain reaction. Oh, it's a drug. It's just, oh, it's not for me. It's like, no, you're just a serious motherfucker. You just aren't willing to laugh at yourself, aren't willing to stop fucking judging yourself. Like that's kind of, I don't know, like again, it's maybe not for every single person that's ever existed in all of reality, but for the most part, I think it's pretty much the indication. And thinking about people I know who either smoke a lot or who don't, like that is a big split and people who avoid it for very specific reasons of getting anxious. It's like it's just showing you yourself. It's just showing you what's under the surface, but it's just so funny that we're so resistant to that as a collective, as a certain mentality that we just made it illegal. We're like, no, I don't know. I can't even handle thinking about that, not taking things super seriously. So yeah, let's just make it illegal for everyone. It's like, well, it's just madness.
I think it helps to remember what it is that we're facing when we try things like cannabis or really any drug, because we're putting ourselves in a significantly different conscious environment. We're facing another form of uncertainty, and so that's what's coming with us. We forget that that's the common denominator, in terms of our life. That it really just comes down to the moment and your response to it, right? And the moment is always uncertain. So your response is either to embrace the uncertainty and pay attention, or resist the uncertainty and become a victim. Right? And that is what happens when we go into any drug experience. More uncertainty and your response to it. So it helps, I think, to recognize that if you are, say, a very tense person, or if you don't know how fucking tense you are, you've never tried cannabis. Let's just say that, okay? Have one hit, just a little pull, and take it easy. You're going to feel uncertain, but it won't be overwhelmingly uncertain, and you can kind of wade yourself into it. Okay, that helps. Or you can have 2 or 3 or 4, or just smoke the whole goddamn joint, and you're going to end up in the deep end of uncertainty, which may seem frightening, but is also incredibly educational. If you remember, you'll be fine. Right? Because ultimately, that is how people who have practiced or used marijuana or psychedelics for a long time, that's how they do so well. They just know they'll be fine. That's really the determining factor. They're just like, yeah, and at the end of this, I'll still be me. And that's the embracing of uncertainty. They don't expect to have any sense of control through the experience, but they know they'll still be themselves, which means it really just comes down to their response to uncertainty. So if your response to uncertainty is to panic and worry if you're good enough or you have enough preparation to deal with it, that's going to be a shitty trip for you, but that's going to be a shitty life for you if that's your response to uncertainty. And that's when you're riddled with doubt. That's when you're riddled with anxiety. That's when you're worried about judgment. It's all the same shit. Your response to uncertainty. So, smoking marijuana, practicing with psychedelics from time to time, is still practice with your response to uncertainty. That's the lesson. That's what's happening, is you are constantly determining whether or not you're going to let uncertainty beat you or accept that it is you. And those are the 2 responses to life, to psychedelics, to drugs, to every single moment of your fucking life. Are you going to respond to uncertainty with fear? And if so, why? Other than the fiction that you have to.
Well said. Yeah, and it's always that it even going through like a say a edible experience, like I've kept that mentality's helped me a lot. Just yeah, I'm gonna get through it. But then even thinking about it now, like recognizing that every moment's uncertain and our avoidance of it, like there's almost a peacefulness to that because the uncertainty of this moment, there's no end to that. It's like this is just as uncertain as things are when you're super fucking high. It's just that it's not you're I don't know, like you're not as sensitive to it, so it doesn't
Not thinking
feel
as much. You're not as aware of all the consequences or considerations, right? Like when you're not high, you are under a lot of assumptions. This is the same
yeah.
room it's always been. This is the same day it's always been. I'm in my home. I'm safe. I know what's going to happen. 3 o'clock, I got to go do this. It's really easy to do that. But when you're super present and you lose all sense of your timeline or what you're supposed to do later or what you did earlier, it gets a little jarring.
Yeah, seriously. But and so it's so there's never that certainty. We just, as you said, exist in a lot of assumptions. But then if you're willing to be uncertain, like when you're not high and whether you're high or not, regardless, kind of starts to be a lot of overlap in the mentality. Like there isn't an end to that. So it's not like that dreadful sort of feeling where it's like, oh my God, this is never gonna end. It's just like this doesn't end, so I might as well make the most of it right now. Like there isn't another point. There's not another point in time. It's not even like there's not another point in time, blah blah blah, sort of like no, there's like there is no other experience. There's no other point that you'll ever experience in time besides this one right now. And so well like and I even just realizing I'll hold on to the idea that there's like I'm becoming something or shifting or growing or changing. And it's not to say those things aren't happening, but when we hold on to the mental idea that it's happening, we're holding on to the mental idea of ourselves. And we're holding on to that character that is changing. Like in order to be something separate from reality that is changing or growing or, you know, becoming something more or fucking improving, there has to be an idea. There has to be a conceptual idea. There can be no other point. There can be no measurement without an idea. And so as there is any measurement or any idea that there's a trajectory that's gaining speed or gaining ground or improving, like it necessitates a conceptual idea right now. And so you can't simultaneously really let go and measure yourself at the same time ever. Like you have to be willing to let go of the false certainty of knowing how you're doing always. And it's just realizing you're always doing. Like you're always just fucking doing. And as I was saying before, like you can't know how you're doing. You can't measure yourself really. Like you can. There's fucking tools to measure certain things that you do or exercises or I don't know, fucking speed reading speed if you want to do that. Like there's ways to measure for sure, but it has nothing to do. It's not tied to anything about you. It's like measuring things that you're doing, but it's not measuring you.
How could it? You're everything, right? That's the whole thing. Like, if for you to be measured, you would have to be separate, right? And that right there is the misunderstanding. Like we keep assuming like you're Andrew separate from reality, not Andrew reality focused into a certain point. And that's the difference in perspective. So we can't evaluate, we can't measure because that requires two things. You're going to measure one infinite universe to another infinite universe because that's all you're doing when you're comparing people, right? So you can't compare people, right? Because you don't know what they're capable of. They've had entirely different lives. They are entirely different universes, as it were. Right? And so it's an interesting thing that we get caught up into. I wanted to mention before we get too far, we have about 25 minutes here left of this episode. And then after that, we're going to be continuing on Patreon. If you can join us, it's going to be a 3-hour discussion today. We have our tier 2 group, and then we have a tier 3 group, as we do every Sunday, and that's a 2-hour discussion. And those conversations get really deep. They get to be a lot of fun. We do them every Sunday. If you can join us, I would love to see you there. And then we'll continue on with this discussion. But I just want to mention that very, very quickly. As well as we have a lot of people in the audience right now. So if you can, do vote for Dualistic Unity at podcastawards.com. We are in the semifinal. Well, we're in the nomination phase right now. I'm looking for the vote for Dualistic Unity thing. And there it is. Aha. So if you're watching this, do check out that QR code. Vote for Dualistic Unity quickly if you can. It's very much appreciated. Now, back to what we were talking about, which was basically just not being able to measure yourself. That means you can't measure anyone, right? That means that every person you meet that you're like, oh, you're a low vibration person, you're really just thinking about yourself again. What do you think? What is that based on other than your perception of yourself? Right? There isn't a single goddamn idea you have of somebody else that isn't based on some idea you have of yourself, right? Because they create one another. The idea of yourself creates the idea of everyone else in different variation. And isn't that fun? So this is what is always trying to be communicated in religion. And it's terribly communicated because, of course, it becomes religion rather than just the practice of being. Because that's all it is. It's just getting out of the way enough to see what you are. And as you were saying, in terms of it, of letting go of the idea of progress, because you're not getting anywhere, because you are not the idea of yourself. You're not actually ascending or achieving 5D or any of that shit. What you are doing is just getting a greater and greater and greater sensitivity to your existence, to yourself. That's really all it is. But the self-knowledge that we're all pursuing is not self-knowledge in a conceptual way. It's a state of self-knowledge, of being yourself and having a feeling for what that is. This is why I always say, like, it's important to recognize when you're confused, because that's how you start to understand when you're not. Right? As you start to feel it out. But all that's happening there is you're getting more and more of a sensitivity for the duality of your existence, for the duality of your own awareness, of your own consciousness, that you can, in fact, be confused, that you can, in fact, get lost in this idea of yourself or not. And in those moments when you're not lost in your idea of yourself, we have these weird fucking ways of trying to describe it. I found God, or I've touched the spiritual, or I'm in the zone. Right? Because what is the zone other than a state of being? where you're not doubting yourself, you're not thinking about yourself, you're just in a state of motion that seems effortless. Well, that state of motion is available all the time if you have the willingness to just let go of the need to evaluate yourself, to analyze your progress, right? Just let go. Just keep going. And you'll be surprised how much you're learning and what you're capable of. But we keep trying to go, what? Tell me. And you just get in the way.
Yeah, and you've mentioned before in letting go, it's like eventually you let go of the need to let go. Because even that thought of letting go, like like with everything, can become a very conceptual thing, and then because you can still involve you. It's like I'm letting go now. I'm in the process of letting go. How much have I let go? I've let go the fucking 25% today of shit. And tomorrow I'm hoping to let go of 30% of shit. And it's like, Jesus Christ. And so that's the letting go of the need to let go. It's the recognition that like you're already doing everything. Like you're already doing everything perfectly as you are. Like the you that you are right now, to the degree that you've let go of anything, of any conceptual ideas, is perfect, right? Like the letting go of anything, right? And so that recognition that you hold, like the you that you are, there isn't this thing where you fucking let go of, oh, I've let go of everything. And it's like, okay, then what? They're like, there isn't. There has to be. It's just that spectrum, and the investment in holding on versus letting go. There's not a better end of the spectrum. Like you're already doing it perfectly right now, and so this thought, like, and it's very common, I think, in spiritual community and other things, like letting go is this sort of fad thing where like it kind of like how the power of now turned being present into this fad, and it's like, oh, how present are you right now? It's like you're all, shut up, you're always the present moment. Like there's not a way to be more or less present unless you are measuring yourself, involving your conceptual idea of yourself. And so with letting go, it's like it's so funny how it's talked about like it's this process, and there's
But
like a
you can't do
fucking,
it,
in what
right?
sense?
You can't let go,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
That's it. It's the same thing as embracing uncertainty. It's a feeling that only ever happens now. As soon as there's a you that did it, you're not doing it.
Yeah, it's like I let go a bunch this morning. It's like, what? And
Not
then
doing it now, though.
exactly. It's like there's a scoreboard in some fucking fairy tale part of the world that has like how well everyone's let go, and like a spectrum. And it's like, yeah, you exactly though. You can't let go. If you're involved, it's not letting go. And so it's like, nah, that'll make some people angry, because people want to be able to do those things. And especially with, we see it in meditation, like, oh, how long can you meditate? And it's like, oh my god, as if that's the end all be all. Like, not to rank on Eckhart too much, but I remember hearing once they were like, oh, do you have any like secret talents or something? And he said something like, I can sit quietly for 7 minutes without any thoughts arising. And it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, like that's incredibly focused on
Kind of sad.
measuring yourself. Yeah, it's like you say that like that's the best thing you can ever do, is just sit down without any thoughts. And it's like, really? Like that's not what it's about. It's like no matter how much shit you're going through, no matter how much you're dealing with, no matter how much shit you think there's wrong with you, it's like that's it happening perfectly as you are right now. And so the thought that I need to let go of more things, and then, or I need to overcome this, or I need to get better at that, it's like that's what's holding you back. It's just that. And that's what's holding you back from participating. That's what's holding you back from living your life. That's what's holding you back from doing all the things that you've always wanted to do, is like this made up idea that there's another point in time that you're going to be different in a better way. or the fear of being different in a worse way. And it's like it doesn't happen. Like it never arrives until you do right now. And this is the only point that you can.
Now, you see, this is the important part. I think is that we want so badly for there to be a reason it's hard to let this go. We want so badly for there to be something that we haven't gotten yet, some understanding we haven't come to, some concept we don't fully understand. And we don't really want it to just come down to whether or not we're choosing right now to invest in our thought. I'm doing it because it, this, and I'm always been like, oh my god, trauma, and I just recently finished a divorce. Oh, my husband might be doing that. Like, there's always some justification, and thought will always say, no, pay a little bit more attention. Pay a little bit more attention, and until we go, the only reason I'm doing that is because I keep choosing to. We don't stop choosing to. And that's really it. I had somebody send me a message earlier today. Might have been yesterday. It's on Instagram, so I don't really check my messages all the time. But they were saying, like, I've been listening for a while. I'm having a lot of problems getting this. I keep thinking about these things. So ask yourself if they're real. Like, there's no thing to get except for you to actually have the will to go, I'm thinking about that. I don't really know. And drop it. But it's the willingness to do that yourself, to willingly say, I don't really know. Every time a thought comes up and says, yes, I do. No, I don't. Nothing is going to make that easier than it is right now. This is important to understand. There isn't an insight that's going to make that choice to disregard your thought as truth easier. There's no lesson, there's no insight, there's no mantra, there's no philosophy, there's no belief. There is nothing ever that's ever going to make it easier for you to do what you can do right fucking now, which is just doubt your thought. That's it. You just have to be willing to. You just have to be willing to face the alternative that your thought promises you control. Your thought is promising you that you have an idea of who you are, how valuable you are, where you're going, and how things are going to work out. Your thought is always promising you the fucking world. Always. It always will. It will never stop doing that. The only thing that you can do and you can start practicing is whether or not you believe that shit. And the only way to stop yourself from believing it is to question it. And it's always hard at first until you start recognizing how often you've been wrong. And then all of a sudden you recognize, oh, I don't need to always feel like I'm in control. I actually do better if I'm just paying attention here and now. And the path changes, but it never gets any easier. Okay? You just get better at doing it. There's nothing you need to do outside of that decision here and now. And your thoughts like, no, there's a path. What about this? What about your insecurities? What about the stuff from your childhood that you haven't dealt with yet? All of that, it's not real. It's just habitual self-narrative. It's a habit your brain has gotten into so you can have some idea of who the fuck you are and where you're going. Your brain doesn't know, and it hates not knowing because with that usually comes fear. But if you understand that not knowing equals attention, equals awareness, equals empathy. If you understand that being present is understanding you don't fucking know, then you'll get better at it and you'll find your intuition because your intuition is always here until you start talking over it with that narrative. That's just a habit. It's just a habit. If you want to find that intuition, just question the narrative. Question it until you stop paying attention to it in the same way that you would question some loudmouth drunk at the bar that's just ongoing about shit that doesn't matter to you. You'd be like, why am I even listening to this? You can't tell it to shut up, but you can stop listening to it as if it's telling you the truth. And that changes everything, but you can do that now. And that's always true. It's always true. It's always been true. It always will be true. There is nothing you need to do. There's no class you need to take. There's no lesson you need to learn. There's no insight you need to memorize. There's no fucking mantra you need to tell yourself. It's always the same choice here and now. Either believe the fiction of you or be free.
Well said. Fuck. It really is. It's like all the fucking spiritual shit out there, all the belief-based stuff, all the any insight you ever have, like it just comes down to that. Like I'm thinking this about this. Do I really know? Yes or no? Always no. Am I willing to am I willing to take that in and just keep stepping through? And that's where the faith in yourself is built, when you're willing to just step into something fully not knowing, but you're always stepping into things not knowing. It's like we kind of keep things, I don't know, like at bay in a sense, but it doesn't change the fact that you're stepping into something that's uncertain. And so it really is your best odds stepping in to uncertainty. But at least for me, like, there was such a long period of time where I refused to recognize that I don't know. And so I wasn't willing to let go at all to any of my false certainty. And so there was no experience of it. Like, I didn't even know what it was be like to let go and just have faith in myself and step through something without the constant measurement, because I was constantly measuring myself. And so if I stepped into something and didn't feel like I had control, it's like, well, that could turn into anything. At least if I go in with all of this false certainty and feeling that I do know, then at least things won't go incredibly awfully. Maybe they'll just go kind of terribly. It's like the at least for me, it was always the extremes. Like, oh, everything could fall apart if I let go. Like everything could go to shit if I let go. So I got to keep it a little bit tense, because then it'll only go a little bit shitty, and that's okay. I can live with that. It won't be so disastrous that I can never fucking overcome it. But it's always just that. Like, am I believing my thoughts, or am I not? And then if you're willing to recognize just how uncertain everything is all the time. Oh, I think those people are thinking about me. No, you don't. You don't know. I think this part of my life is really objectively difficult, and it's definitely something that shouldn't be happening, and I'm not learning anything right now. Do I actually know that? No, you don't. And so just any time that false certainty comes up, as you recognize, I don't know, okay with that, you start to find out what you're capable of when you let go. You start to have that faith in yourself to just step through, and you're like, oh, I can do that. Oh, maybe I can do that too. Oh, I can do that too. Oh, I can also just let go and step into that. Like, all of a sudden, almost anything's kind of on the table, because no matter how it goes, there isn't the additional thought that it could mean something about you permanently, forever. Like, without that, then you ask anyone, what's holding you back from stepping into that? What's holding you back from doing that? And it's always, well, this happened before, and like, oh, it definitely meant this. And like all that, those times it happened before, it didn't mean that thing. And you don't know what you're going to be capable of if you keep doing that. And so it cultivates, and that's the practice. It's not practice in the sense of like, you know, practicing a sport and you get certain reps in on certain activities and certain specific situations, and that sort of practice. The practice is just, I don't know. That's okay. I'm going to find out how this goes. And if I don't think about myself and try and measure myself along the way, that's my best chance of it going, and not even going well or poorly. It's not your best chance of it going well, but like you'll be okay the whole time, because your experience comes from you. Your experience comes from your response to the situation. You're going through at all times. And so if it's just that, I don't know, willing to step through, it's like, if you're good, then what else is there to consider? Not in a selfish lack of sensitivity sense, but just in the willingness to be like, yeah, this experience for me right now is okay, because I don't know and I can't know, and that's okay. And so I don't know. Let's just find out. And if you keep doing that, then it keeps getting easier, because it's like any situation that's applicable to. And everyone has certain situations that are going to be more difficult because there's more shit that's come up with a specific type of situation than others, because there's certain things where someone steps in, they're like, yeah, I don't know how this is going to go. And then like there's like, I've always driven my whole life, never had a fear of like flying, never had a fear of cars, but I know there's people who are super afraid of driving, super afraid of doing those things. So to me, those are like don't even really cross my mind. Whereas there's other situations that someone else may be like, well, why would you worry about that? Because I've had my experiences have been, there's been traumatizing things that have happened in other situations. So, but everyone has those sorts of things, and there's going to be variations in things that are easier to step into uncertainty with, and not as easy, just based on those previous experiences. But it's all the same sort of thing, and it's all ties in together. So it all kind of is cumulative and builds on itself anyway. So if you're willing, if you have certain things that you're very, very afraid of, like stepping on uncertainty in other ways, and then you'll get better at that, and then you can step into all the other ways, because it's the same sort of uncertainty, and it's that same illusion that's being let go of in any situation, because they're always uncertain. You never know how it's going to go, and you never know, on top of that, you never know how it's going right now. And so you might as well just participate. You might as well just take part, and see what you're capable of.
See, that's just it, right? Like, we keep wanting to get to this point where I know everything's going to be okay. You don't get that. You don't. You just don't get that. Right? At the very most, you get to know that everything will continue. That's kind of the nice thing. But what you can do is look at it this way. You don't get to know whether or not everything's going to be okay. In the same way that you don't get to know whether or not you're going to be totally okay wandering into a strange forest. But you wouldn't wander into that forest with your eyes closed. You would want to keep your eyes open. And every time we get lost in the fiction of me, we are closing our eyes. So you're trying to gauge how well you're doing. And in doing so, removing yourself from the environment that you're a part of. And that is making it more and more difficult for you to engage with that environment in a way that makes the most of it, because you're not fully in it. So it's not about whether or not you can know it's all going to be quote unquote okay, but you know it's more likely to be quote unquote okay because you're involved and your eyes are open and you're not just sitting there shaking and afraid with your eyes closed, trying to think about how well you're going to do if you could just start moving. And you never do, because you're always trying to judge how well you're going to do. So just open your eyes and take a step forward, and the rest takes care of itself.
Yeah, yeah, and we forget that's always the case. Like it doesn't, like, we sometimes all get caught in talking about uncertainty, like it's you're stepping into a fucking hurricane every single time you're stepping into it. And it's like, no, you just don't know what's to come. It could be anything, right? It's not like you step into it and all of a sudden you're just going to be thrown for a loop. Shit's going to start going sideways. And it's like, okay, but this is my practice and I'm getting better at it. It's like, you don't know what it's going to be. And it's essential, almost never, at least for people who go through hypotheticals and they go through all these worst case situations. It's almost never that, but it's just a willingness to find out. And it's like, yeah, anything could happen, but we downplay the fact that we're involved in it, and you have a sway over the situation. Like, you are that situation you're going into. And so usually shit starts going awry when everyone's tense and focused on things being correct and right, and the right things happening. And if they aren't the right things happening based on their made up idea of what the right thing is, then they're going to start going awry. And so without all of those things, situations don't have as much of a potential for volatility if everyone involved is more or less in that mentality. That said, you could be in that mentality and then someone else could be like, you know, really, really lost in shit, really distracted, very destructive. And so it's not like this cure, but what's the best way to handle someone who's super destructive other than actually seeing them and paying attention, as opposed to like even stepping into it and thinking they should be different than they are, like thinking, oh, they shouldn't be acting like that. They shouldn't be doing that. This is so wrong. They need to change. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, you're disempowering yourself. You're cutting off your ability to influence the situation, to be a part of that, because they're holding on to their beliefs about what's right and wrong, and very strict beliefs. But you're doing the same fucking thing when you're judging them for not being in that spot, for being very rigid. It's the same thing. It's not even like, oh, they're more they're more destructive because they're more fucked up. If you're, super caught in thinking they're doing the wrong thing and the right way to do it, it's the same fucking mentality. It's the same thing that gets people to that point where they're on the extreme end of the spectrum of false certainty, knowing that they're a certain way, knowing that other people should, pay for shit that's happened to them, and having all of this false certainty. As you judge them, you're maintaining the same fucking mentality. And that's the shift, really. And that's why we keep reinforcing all this stuff, because shit keeps happening and we keep judging it. Like, we keep seeing, you see something on the news, this atrocity, and you're like, oh, what a terrible person, as opposed to looking at the whole component of their life, like the entirety of their life, and being like, oh, I see how they got to that point. I could understand why someone would potentially respond in that way, even in the extreme cases, because that's what makes the shift, is being willing to look at something like that and being like, yeah, I could see myself doing something like that if I was in the same situation as them. And it doesn't mean that you agree with what they did, but there's a state of empathy that totally shifts the conversation. But as you were saying, it's just our own self-judgment. If I did that thing, I would judge myself. And that's always what people are saying when they talk about someone, even saying, something like, oh, this person, oh, they're a little this way, or they're a little that way. It's like, as I hear that, as I hear myself saying it, or I hear someone else saying it, all I'm hearing is like, all you're telling me right now is your own insecurities, is your own idea of the right and the wrong way to act according to how you would judge yourself. Like, you're just telling me how you would judge yourself if you were to act like that. And so anyone who's acting differently or within that realm, you have to judge them by necessity, because you're keeping that at bay because of your own false certainty and control for the right way to live that you have to maintain in order to keep maintaining it. You have to keep judging people who are acting any differently than you are.
For sure. I want to mention quickly, because this is important. There is a difference between judgment and discernment, in my opinion. Judgment always comes back to your idea of yourself, your value going up and down according to the evaluation that you're giving someone else. So if you're looking at somebody and you're judging them in a way that lowers them in terms of their value or their potential or any of those things, that's a judgment. That's more or less about you. Discernment is recognizing when somebody is acting out of a sense of lack or acting out of a certain pattern. You're not judging the pattern, but you're aware of the pattern. And it's important to be aware of the patterns, because you're aware of your own patterns, and that's all part of the same lesson. And in doing so, you can discern better what the situation is. If you're judging, that's more or less a fear response most of the time, right? Discernment is just expanding your awareness, expanding the considerations you're willing to look at. And that often happens when you're not judging someone. So I just wanted to mention that very quickly. Just because you're not judging doesn't mean you're not going to notice things about the other person. It doesn't mean you're not going to notice things about how they're doing something that might be potentially self-destructive. It means you're not going to look at them as being lower in value for doing those things. You will just recognize it as part of the environment, part of the considerations, and you will act accordingly. It's important to just mention that very quickly, because I've actually had people ask, well, if I'm not judging, does that mean I'm just not looking at other people? Look, what if I'm thinking about them? It's like, that's fine. You're always going to think about them. The question is, are you entertaining the fiction of you and the fiction of them? Or are you just looking at the environmental considerations moment to moment to moment to moment? Not judging them based on their past, but discerning what's happening right now and not evaluating yourself or them accordingly. Right. So just something to mention very quickly. We're going to take a break. I'm going to come back in 15 minutes on patreon.com/dualistic unity. The QR code is on the screen. Do join us. Sundays are awesome. We have a tier 2 group that's an hour, and then a tier 3 group that's 2 hours. And we're going to talk about a bunch of shit. We would love to see you. Andrew, I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. I'm glad I made it here. I'm glad I arrived. I still don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This is going to be a fun day.
Likewise. Yeah. This is a fun chat. Excited to chat with everyone on Patreon and